Can you take us to town? The question cut through the night like a blade. Wyoming Territory, late autumn, 1889. The wind had a way of biting straight through bone that season, slipping through every crack and seam of the Kincaid ranch house as if it had a mind of its own. Troy Kincaid woke not from a dream, but from a sound soft, dull, and wrong. Not the usual groan of old timber settling. This was careful, measured. He sat up, listening. Another faint knock. Wood brushing wood. Troy swung his legs over the side of the bed and reached for the oil lantern. He lit it with a flick of practice. Hands the flame blooming low and steady. His revolver waited where it always did, close enough to touch. He slipped on his coat, shoved his feet into his boots, and moved through the house without a word. The door creaked open to a sky smothered in clouds. No moon, just wind rolling across the field, rattling dead grass and whispering warnings. Lantern carved a narrow tunnel of light as Troy stepped into the cold, his breath fogging. The sound came again. Closer to the GRANARY dot, he rounded the building slowly, boots crunching on frost. The lantern caught a shape by the far wall, a woman crouched beside a battered wooden cart. Her hair hung dark and wet against her face, plastered there by wind and sweat. The coat she wore was thin, torn at the hem, and no match for the night. Behind her stood two children, a little girl no older than 6, wrapped in a blanket too big for her. A boy around 10, shoulders squared as if he thought standing taller might keep the cold away. Neither cried. Neither spoke. That silence told Troy more than fear ever could. He stopped a few steps away and raised the lantern. "That's far enough," he said, voice low but firm. "Who are you?" The woman looked up. She didn't flinch, didn't beg. Her eyes were tired steady in a way that came from long roads and harder choices. She rested one hand on the cart, the other lightly on the boy's shoulder, and said quietly, "Can you take us to town?" The words settled between them. Heavy. Troy glanced at the crates strapped to the cart, 3 of them, roughly nailed shut, weather-worn. Then at the children again. They stood close together, used to nights like this, used to waiting. "Towns. 5 miles, Troy said. "You planning to walk?" "We were," she answered. He studied her a moment longer. She didn't shift, didn't lie with her eyes. Whatever she was running from, it wasn't hunger alone. And she wasn't stealing, not with the way her fingers checked the girl's blanket when the wind tugged it loose. "What's in the crates?" he asked. "Everything worth keeping," she said after a pause. "That's all I can tell you right now." The wind howled across the field. Troy lowered the lantern slightly, thinking. Then he nodded once. "I'll take you," he said. "But only if you promise to come back home." The word home seemed to catch her off guard. Her brows knit for half a second, like she wasn't sure she remembered what it meant. Then she nodded. "My name's Maria," she said. "Troy Kincaid." He stepped forward, took hold of the cart, and lifted. It was heavier than it looked. The children followed him toward the house without being told. Maria came last, watching everything inside. Troy lit the fireplace and set a kettle on. He didn't ask questions. She didn't offer answers. The children curled up near the hearth, exhaustion pulling them under fast. Maria sat stiffly at the edge of a chair, eyes moving over the walls, the rifle by the door, the windows. "I'll take you at first light," Troy said at last. "Thank you," she replied, barely above a whisper. He leaned against the mantel, arms crossed. "You've got secrets, Miss Maria, but if you're running from something bad enough to walk 5 miles in this weather, then staying still would be worse." She nodded again. "Thank you for not asking why." Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, the fire cracked and settled. For the first time in years, Troy's house held strangers, and it didn't feel wrong. It felt like the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. At dawn, the wagon rolled out under a pale sky. Maria sat beside him, wrapped in an old blanket. The children slept in the back, huddled together. Troy kept his eyes on the road, the lantern swinging gently. "What happened to your husband?" he asked quietly. Maria didn't look at him. "Dead," she said. Then after a beat, "It would have been worse if he wasn't." He didn't ask more. When the town lights finally flickered ahead, Troy slowed the horses by a frozen stream. Maria climbed down and washed her face. She opened one crate just enough for Troy to see papers, a ledger, the edge of gold coins. "I don't steal," she said when she noticed his gaze. "I didn't say you did," Troy replied. "And whatever that is, it matters less than those kids." She closed the crate and met his eyes. "I only need a few days." "We'll see," he said, helping her back onto the seat. "Let's get you to town first." The wagon rolled on, the night watching from behind. Dry Creek lay half asleep when Troy guided the wagon down its narrow main road. Lanterns still glowed behind curtained windows, and a thin curl of smoke rose from only a few chimneys. The town always woke slowly, like it didn't trust the morning. To stay, Troy pulled the reins in front of the small white chapel at the edge of town. Its steeple cut a sharp line into the misty sky, and the door looked older than the street itself. "We'll start here," he said. Climbing down, Maria followed carefully, easing the children so they wouldn't wake. Ben stirred, but didn't open his eyes. Sadie clutched Maria's coat even in sleep. Troy knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. Reverend Eli Whitlock stood there, thin as a fence post, gray hair slicked back, eyes sharp enough to miss nothing. His stern expression softened when he saw Troy. "Well," the Reverend said, "you bringing me sinners or saints today?" "Neither," Troy replied. "Just folks who need somewhere safe." Whitlock stepped aside without another word. "Then bring them in." Maria hesitated only a moment before lifting one of the crates. The Reverend reached to help, but she shook her head. "I can carry my own weight." Inside, the chapel smelled of old wood and cold ash. Maria set the crate near the pews and opened it. Papers filled the box-stamped documents, bank slips, folded letters. Whitlock's brow furrowed. "You need these hidden." "Yes," Maria said, "from the wrong kind of law." The Reverend closed the lid gently. "And they'll stay right where no one thinks to look." They didn't linger. Troy paid for a back room at the boarding house, a quiet one, far from the street. The children slept through the move, worn down to the bone. "I need to see someone," Maria said once they were alone. Troy frowned. "Who?" "The sheriff." "That's risky." She met his gaze. "It's necessary." He studied her for a long second, then nodded. "I'll wait outside." The sheriff's office sat 2 streets over. Maria walked alone, head high, shoulders tight. Troy leaned against a post across the road, watching. Time dragged. An hour passed. At another dot, just as Troy pushed off the post, Maria stepped back into the street. Her scarf was pulled high, her movements slow. Troy crossed to her in 3 strides. "What happened?" She didn't answer at first. Instead, she lifted her sleeve. A bruise bloomed dark and ugly on her forearm. Troy's jaw locked. "Maria, there are men who don't want me talking," she said quietly. "Some of them wear badges." His hand curled into a fist. "You want me to go back in there?" She shook her head. "They want fear. I won't give it to them." She paused, then added, "I told him enough of the truth to make him nervous." "Did he believe you?" "He already knew," she said. "He just wanted to remind me what silence costs." They walked back to the boarding house without another word. Inside, Sadie ran to Maria, wrapping her arms tight. Ben stayed back, watching Troy with a careful, measuring look. "We're going to need more than luck," Maria said softly. Troy met her eyes. "You've got me." She didn't smile, but some of the tension drained from her shoulders. By afternoon, they were already heading back toward the ranch. The ride was quieter than before. The town disappeared behind them, but what had happened there clung like smoke. Troy replayed the sheriff's parting look again and again. Back at the ranch, Maria moved like a shadow. She spoke only to the children. Sadie stayed close to her. Skirts. Ben never let her out of sight. That night, the wind rose again, rattling the cottonwoods. Troy stepped out to check the horses and found Maria sitting on the porch steps, a lantern glowing beside her. She didn't startle when he sat down. After a long silence, she spoke. "You asked why I had to leave." He stayed still. "I was born in Louisiana," she said. "Married young." Henry Monroe looked perfect to the world, money, charm, generosity. Her voice tightened. Behind closed doors, he was building something rotten. She told him about the ledgers, the fake names, the money rooted through churches and private banks, about camps disguised as rehabilitation centers. "One route runs north of here," she said. "I found the map." Her voice broke when she spoke of packing the files, of taking Ben, of Sadie's mother, who begged her not to leave the girl behind. She handed Troy a folded paper, names, ages, hurried notes. He recognized one immediately. "Ada Langley," he murmured. Maria nodded. "5 are dead. 2 vanished this year." Troy folded the paper carefully. "Why haven't they arrested you?" "Because I haven't disappeared," she said. "If I vanish before testifying, all of it dies with me." Hooves thundered briefly in the distance, then faded. Troy rose, hand on his revolver. "That wasn't one of ours." Maria stood and went inside. When she returned, she carried another crate and set it between them. Inside were photographs, maps marked in red, bundles of unopened letters. "We'll keep these safe," Troy said. "And we'll keep you safe." She looked at his gun, then at his face. "I've never trusted a man with a weapon," she said quietly. "But I trust you." Troy didn't look away from the dark. "Good, because I don't plan on missing. If anyone comes back." The days that followed settled into a strange, fragile rhythm. Troy rode out before sunrise each morning, taking long, winding paths through the northern woods. He avoided the main roads, the kind men remembered. Once, near a telegraph stop hidden behind a stand of pines, he mailed copies of Maria's documents to an old contact in Denver, a former investigator who owed him favors from a war long past. Troy signed nothing, left no return address, only a small mark they both understood. A horse branded with a single flame. Back at the ranch, life tried to pretend it was ordinary. Maria mended clothes at the table, hands steady despite the weight. She carried. Ben practiced tying knots with a seriousness beyond his years. Sadie learned to guide a pony around the corral, whispering to it like it might understand her fears as well as her hopes. Their laughter came carefully, like something that might break if handled too roughly, but it came. On the 7th morning, Troy was splitting firewood when he sensed someone watching. A rider stood at the edge of the trail, tall, clean boots, black gloves that didn't belong to ranch work. The horse beneath him was well fed and restless. He rode forward slowly, smiling as if he already owned the place. Troy straightened, axe still in hand. The man dismounted with deliberate ease, brushing dust from his coat. His eyes found Maria on the porch instantly. Ben stepped in front of her without thinking. "Well now," the man drawled, "sister-in-law, you've had yourself a journey." Maria's face hardened. What do you want? Lucius? Lucius Gray smiled wider. Just tying up loose ends. Henry left things unfinished. Valuable things. He glanced at Troy. You must be the help. Troy stepped between them. She has nothing for you. Lucius tilted his head. You always did enjoy playing hero, Troy Kincaid. His gaze sharpened. One call to the sheriff, and this little. Refuge turns ugly fast. This isn't the city, Troy said evenly. Out here, folks notice who comes looking. Lucius laughed softly. Out here, people disappear. He swung back onto his horse. 2 days, he called over his shoulder. After that, I stopped asking. That night, no one slept. Troy checked every door, every window. Maria sat at the kitchen table, writing by candlelight 1 letter for Ben, 1 for Sadie. She hid them carefully. By morning, they had made a choice. Would leave. Not to run, but to fight. Carver's Bluff lay 2 days east, beyond Gray's reach. A federal circuit judge held court there. Maria would take the documents herself. When Troy said he was coming, she didn't argue. The children asked. No questions. They packed lightly. Troy prepared the horses. If you go, Troy said quietly, I don't know what I'll have left to open that gate for. Maria met his eyes. I'm not running anymore, she said. I'll come back if you still want me to. He took her hand and held it, long enough for the promise to settle. Carver's Bluff buzzed with smoke and dust. The courthouse loomed tall at the end of Main Street. Inside, Judge Silas Reed listened as Maria laid the box before him. Before he could speak, the door opened. Lucius Gray stepped in, polished and calm, a deputy at his back. This woman is unstable. Gray said smoothly. Maria didn't flinch. I'm a witness. The judge ordered a hearing in 2 days. Gray smiled thinly. They didn't wait for a second chance. By nightfall, they were hiding in an old warehouse on the edge of the freight yards, owned by Troy's friend Elijah Croft. When Troy went out for supplies, he didn't return. Maria found him slumped by the rail yard, blood soaking his shoulder. She dragged him back, hands shaking, pouring whiskey over the wound. You didn't bring danger, Troy rasped. You brought purpose. She leaned in, forehead to his. I'm done running. Outside, a train whistled, moaned. Inside the warehouse, something took root, something that would not let go. Asterisk. Troy drifted in and out of consciousness as the pain ebbed and surged through his shoulder. The warehouse smelled of dust, old grain, and blood. Every time he tried to breathe too deeply, the wound reminded him where he was and why Maria didn't leave his side. She worked with quiet focus, tearing cloth into strips, pressing them hard against the wound to slow the bleeding. Her hands shook only when she thought he couldn't see it. When the worst of it was done, she wrapped his shoulder tight and sat back on her heels, exhaustion finally catching up. You should have stayed hidden, she whispered. Troy managed a weak smile. I don't hide well. She almost laughed, then caught herself. Instead, she rested her forehead briefly against his arm, grounding herself. When she lifted her head again, her eyes were clear. He slept for hours. Outside, night thickened. Somewhere in the distance, men shouted, then fell silent. Maria kept the lantern low and her pistol close. Every creak of the building made her tense. But nothing came. By morning, Troy was awake and lucid, though pale. Elijah Croft returned with bread, bandages, and news whispered low. Gray's stirring things up, Elijah said. Asking questions, sheriff too. Maria closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded. Then we're close. They moved before dawn, slipping out while the freight yard still slept. The children stayed hidden with Elijah, wrapped in blankets, and instructions not to speak to anyone. Maria hated leaving them, But she hated waiting more. The courthouse was already stirring when they arrived. Troy leaned heavier on her now, but he walked under his own strength. Judge Reed listened again as Maria spoke, her voice steadier than it had been days earlier. When Lucius Gray appeared late, this time his confidence had dulled. New evidence lay on the desk. Copies Troy had sent north. Names that matched. Dates that couldn't be denied. Gray argued. The deputy tried to interrupt. Judge Reed raised a hand. By sundown, warrants were signed. They didn't celebrate. They didn't wait. They left Carver's Bluff under a sky bruised with clouds, riding hard back toward the ranch, toward the children. Behind them, the law finally moved. The trial came weeks later. Maria stood in a crowded courtroom, hands folded, spine straight. She spoke the names slowly. Every woman, every camp, every lie. Lucius Gray watched her without blinking until the verdict came. Down. Guilty. The room exhaled as one. Spring reached the ranch quietly. Wildflowers pushed through thawed earth. Maria planted them beside the porch, one for each name she carried. Ben and Sadie laughed more freely now. Troy filed papers at the county office, his signature steady. One afternoon, Maria stepped onto the porch and asked softly, "Can you take us to town?" Troy smiled beneath his hat. "Only if you promise to come back home." This time, she didn't hesitate. She nodded. Spring settled into the valley like a careful promise. The days grew longer, the cold loosening its grip inch by inch. Snow retreated from the fence lines, leaving behind soft earth and the first green shoots brave enough to break through. Maria worked the soil beside the porch with quiet patience, pressing seeds into the ground as if each one were a vow. Troy watched her from the barn doorway more than once, pretending to check tack that didn't need checking. He never said anything. He didn't need to. The way she moved now steadier, less guarded, told him she was no longer living only in the next moment of escape. Ben took to the ranch like he'd been born there. He rose early, helped Troy with chores, asked questions that showed he was always listening, always learning. Sadie followed Maria everywhere, barefoot when the weather allowed, humming to herself while she gathered wildflowers or fed the chickens. Laughter returned slowly, but it stayed. 3 weeks after the verdict, a wagon rolled up the drive just before noon. Troy noticed it first habit, instinct, and stepped forward, one hand resting loosely near his belt. A man climbed down, stiff in his movements, dressed in a city coat already dusted from travel. "Mr. Kincaid?" he asked. Troy nodded. "I'm here on behalf of the county court," the man said, pulling papers from his satchel. "Regarding guardianship." Maria froze where she stood, Sadie's hand in hers. The man cleared his throat. "Given the circumstances and the testimony provided, the court has approved temporary guardianship for Benjamin Monroe and Sadie Langley, pending final review." Troy took the papers carefully. His name was written there in ink, plain and undeniable. Maria covered her mouth, breath catching. Ben looked up at Troy, eyes wide, unsure what to say. Troy knelt in front of him. "This doesn't change who you are," he said gently. "Just means you're not alone anymore." Ben nodded once, fierce and fast. That night, they ate together at the long table. No hurry, no silence. Maria poured coffee. Troy passed bread. Sadie insisted on saying grace in her own halting words. When it was done, Troy stepped outside too. The porch. Maria followed. The sky stretched wide above them. Pale stars scattered thin. For a while, they leaned on the railing without speaking. "You didn't have to do this," she said finally. "Any of it." Troy didn't look at her. "Maybe not, but I wanted to." She studied him, the wind lifting loose strands of her hair. "I spent so long thinking home was something fragile," she said. something you could lose just by turning the wrong corner. And now? He asked. And now I think home is where someone stands their ground for you. He turned then, meeting her eyes. There was no rush in the moment. No danger pressing. Close. Just two people standing in what they had chosen. Weeks passed. Letters arrived from Denver, from families, from women who had survived and were finally being heard. Maria read each one slowly, sometimes with tears, sometimes with a small, quiet smile. She began writing again, not ledgers this time, but stories, names, memories, things she refused to let disappear. One afternoon, Troy found her at the table, brow furrowed, pen hovering. Too heavy? He asked. She shook her head. Just important. He nodded, understanding more than she realized. Summer edged closer. The creek ran fuller. The horses grew restless with warm air and open trails. One morning, Maria stepped onto the porch while Troy saddled up. Can you take us to town? She asked again, a smile tugging at her lips this time. Troy glanced back. Only if you promise to come back home. She laughed softly. I don't need to promise anymore. They rode together, the children in the back, the ranch shrinking behind them, but never feeling distant. And for the first time in a long while, the road ahead didn't feel like something to fear. Summer came in quietly, like it didn't want to disturb what had finally settled. The mornings warmed first. Sunlight crept across the porch boards earlier each day, and the smell of fresh hay clung to the air. Maria rose before the children now, tending the small garden by the fence. The wildflowers she'd planted had taken hold, yellow, blue, stubborn. Things that refused to die, once rooted. Troy noticed how often she paused to study them, as if checking that growth could still be trusted. Life on the ranch found its own pace. Ben learned how to mend tack and ride fence with Troy, his questions fewer but sharper. He listened the way men did when they knew answers mattered. Sadie followed Maria with endless curiosity, helping in the kitchen, humming songs that had no words. At night, the three of them gathered by the fire. Maria read aloud from her growing journal, not the dark parts, not yet, but stories of strength, of women who endured, of places that survived storms. Troy usually sat back, boots stretched, toward the hearth, listening without interrupting. He didn't need to speak. Being there was enough. And one afternoon, a rider appeared on the ridge. Troy spotted him first, as always. He straightened slowly, eyes narrowing. The rider didn't hurry. That alone set Troy on edge. The horse stopped at the gate. The man dismounted, removed his hat, and raised both hands in plain sight. Name's Caleb Morris, he called. I was told I'd find Troy Kincaid here. Troy walked forward, but didn't open the gate. Who's asking? Federal Marshal, the man replied, out of Cheyenne. Maria had stepped onto the porch behind him. Her shoulders stiffened. Morris glanced at her, then back to Troy. I'm not here to cause trouble. Most men who say that are, Troy answered evenly. The marshal sighed. Lucius Gray talked before he was locked up. Not enough to save himself, but enough to leave names behind. The words landed heavy. Maria closed her eyes briefly. There are still men out there, Morris continued. Men who won't be arrested yet, and some who might try to finish what Gray started. Troy's jaw tightened. Then why are you here? To warn you, Morris said. And to offer protection. Maria stepped forward. Protection looks a lot like cages to me. Morris met her gaze without flinching. I won't force you. But you should know your testimony didn't end this. It started something. Silence. Stretched. Troy opened the gate at last. You'll eat before you ride out. Morris blinked, surprised, then nodded. Over supper. The marshal spoke plainly. There would be threats. There would be pressure. Some men would try bribes. Others would try fear. "I won't hide," Maria said quietly. Morris studied her then. Nodded. "Didn't think you would." He left before dusk. That night, Troy checked the perimeter twice. He set extra lanterns by the barn and kept his rifle within reach. Maria sat at the table long after the children slept, writing again. This time, Troy joined her. "You scared?" He asked she thought about it. "Yes," she said honestly. "But I'm not frozen by it anymore." He nodded. "That's the difference." Days passed. No riders came. No shadows lingered. Then a letter arrived sealed. Official. A hearing. Date. Final guardianship approval. Permanent this time. Ben read it twice before looking up. "Does this mean we stay?" Troy rested a hand on his shoulder. "Means you belong." Sadie squealed and threw her arms around Maria's waist. That evening, Maria stood alone at the edge of the field, watching the sun sink low. Troy joined her, quiet as ever. "I used to think finishing this would mean leaving," she said. "That once the truth was out, I'd have nowhere left to stand." "And now?" Troy asked. She turned to him. "Now I think standing still takes more courage." He smiled at that, slow and real. The wind shifted, warm against their backs. Somewhere behind them, the house glowed with lamplight. Children's. Laughter drifted through an open window. Maria reached for Troy's hand, not in urgency, not in fear, but because it felt right. Whatever came next, they would meet it here. Together. Autumn returned the way it always did, quiet at first. Then, all at once, the mornings sharpened. Frost traced the fence rails again, and the cottonwoods along the creek turned gold, their leaves drifting down like slow-burning embers. Nearly. A year had passed since the night Maria first stood by the granary, asking for a ride to town. Life hadn't become easy. It had become steady. Troy noticed the difference in the way the ranch breathed now. Doors opened without hesitation. Footsteps moved with purpose, not fear. The place no longer felt like a man waiting out his days. It felt like something being lived in. Maria's writing took on new weight. Word spread beyond Dry Creek. Survivors came quietly, sometimes alone, sometimes with a friend waiting down. The road. Maria listened to them all. She didn't rush them. She never promised justice, only truth. Troy made sure no one watched them arrive. One afternoon, a stranger lingered too long at the edge of the property. Troy saw the way the man studied the house, the barn, the path to the creek. Troy didn't reach for his gun. He didn't need to. He walked out and stood in plain sight. The stranger took one look at him and left. That night, Maria said, "You didn't even threaten him." Troy shrugged. Didn't need to. He saw what was worth protecting. Ben had grown taller, stronger. He no longer hovered near Maria's side, but stayed within sight, always alert. Sadie learned to ride without help, laughing when she fell and brushing herself off like it was nothing. One evening, as the sky burned red behind the hills, Troy found Maria on the porch steps, again same place as that first night she told him the truth. She held a folded letter. "It's from New Orleans," she said. "The last case connected to Henry closed this morning." Troy sat beside her. "That it?" She nodded slowly. No more hearings. No more testimony. Silence settled between them, not heavy, just thoughtful. "So what happens now?" he asked. Maria stared out across the field. "Now I choose what comes next." She turned to him then, really turned, eyes steady. "I don't want to leave, Troy. Not when things are hard. Not when they're quiet either." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood, reached into his coat, and pulled out a folded document he'd been carrying for weeks. He handed it to her. She unfolded it slowly, breath-catching as she read. Her name, the ranch. Legal language she recognized instantly. "What is this?" she asked, though she already knew. "Half of it," Troy said. "A part I can give." Her throat tightened. "You don't owe me." "I know," he interrupted. Gently. "That's why I'm offering." She looked at the paper again, then up at him. "You're asking me to stay." "I'm asking you to choose," he said. "Same as you always have." Maria stood, folded the paper carefully, and placed it back in his hands. "I don't need ink to know where I belong," she said. "But yes, I'm staying." That night, they told the children. Sadie clapped so hard her hands stung. Ben just nodded, eyes bright, like he'd already known winter came early. Snow fell heavy, quieting the land. The ranch held firm. Inside, the fire burned warm. Maria's journal grew thicker. Troy repaired what needed fixing. The children learned how to wait out storms without fear. One night, as the wind pressed hard against the walls, Maria stood at the window, watching snow swallow the path to the road. Troy came up behind her. "You miss the world out there?" She shook her head. "I spent too long chasing places that never meant me well." She turned, meeting his gaze. "I found something better by standing still." He rested his forehead against hers. No rush. No promises spoken out loud. None needed. By spring, the ranch bloomed again. And one clear morning, as Troy hitched the wagon, Maria stepped onto the porch, sunlight in her hair. "Can you take us to town?" she asked, same words, different meaning. Troy smiled beneath the brim of his hat. "Only if you promise to come back home." She stepped down, took his hand, and answered without hesitation. "I already am." Asterisk, the road to town rolled out easy beneath the wagon wheels, dust rising soft instead of sharp. Spring had returned in full, greening the valley and filling the air with the scent of damp earth and new grass. The horses moved at a steady pace, familiar with the path now, as if they knew there was nothing to outrun anymore. Maria sat beside Troy, the brim of his hat shading her eyes from the sun. Sadie leaned over the side of the wagon, pointing out wildflowers as they passed, while Ben sat tall in the back, reins of responsibility already resting comfortably on his shoulders. The ranch faded behind them, swallowed by waves of tall grass, but this time it didn't feel like leaving. Maria glanced back once, more out of habit than fear. The house stood quiet and solid against the hills, smoke rising lazily from the chimney. It waited not as a place to escape to, but as a place that held. "I used to think home was something you could lose," she said softly. Troy looked over, the corner of his mouth lifting. "And now?" "Now I know home is where someone keeps the light on," she replied. "Not because they have to, but because they choose to." He nodded, understanding settling in his chest like something earned. Town came into view slowly. Dry Creek had changed too. New storefronts stood beside old ones. The chapel door was open, sunlight spilling inside. Reverend Whitlock waved as they passed. People nodded not with curiosity, but recognition. Maria felt the difference in her. Bones. They finished their errands quickly. Supplies. Paper, a ribbon. Sadie insisted on choosing herself. Before leaving, Maria paused outside the sheriff's office. The door was shut, the windows dark. She exhaled and kept walking. On the ride back, a wagon was quiet in the best way. The wind tugged gently at Maria's hair, loose strands catching. The light. She rested her hand on the seat between herself and Troy, and after a moment, he placed his own over it. No words followed. When the ranch came back into view, Sadie clapped her hands. "We're home." Troy pulled the reins, slowing the horses as the gate creaked open. The land welcomed them without ceremony. Just open ground, open sky, and the promise of another ordinary day. Later, as dusk settled, Maria stood by the garden, touching the flowers she'd planted months before. Each one had grown wild and uneven, exactly as it pleased. Troy joined her, lantern in hand. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Not running when you had the chance." She shook her head. "I regret that I ever thought running was the same." As freedom, he considered that. "What is it then?" "Choosing where you stand," she said, "and staying." Inside, Ben and Sadie laughed over a game they'd made up, voices carrying through open windows. The sound filled the yard. Stitch the day closed. As night settled in, Maria returned to her journal one last time. She wrote names, dates. Then, at the bottom of the page, she added a final line, not for the world, but for herself. "Home is not where you hide. It's where you return." She closed the book. On the porch, Troy waited, hat in his hands. She stepped beside him, leaning into the quiet strength he offered without question. Somewhere far off, a train whistle sounded, heading toward places that once would have pulled her forward. She didn't look. The ranch breathed around them. The night stretched wide and gentle. And in the stillness of the Wyoming plains, what they had built together held rooted in earth, in truth, and in a promise that no longer needed to be spoken. Because this time, when she came back from town, she wasn't returning to shelter. She was coming home.